last time you were skeptical of something or someone? For some of you, it was the last time you made dinner plans with that person or that couple, and you were skeptical that they were going to show up on time. For some of you, it was the last time your boss called an all-staff meeting and gathered everybody together and said, we have a brand new strategy that's going to change everything. You were skeptical. For some of us, it was the very first time that our significant other looked us in the face and said, I love you. And you were skeptical that they truly, deeply loved you. The last time for me was not that long ago. It was actually in the middle of Wrigleyville. I had gone to a Cubs game with a good friend, and after the Cubs game, we were faced with trying to exit Wrigleyville. And we had driven and we had parked, and in Wrigleyville, they do parking just a little bit different than the rest of the world. You see, in a normal parking lot, this is what it would look like. 2 cars, 2 spaces, end to end. So if you're there first and you're the front car, you can just pull away. If you're the back car, you can back out and pull away. But in Wrigleyville, it's just extra. And so what they do is instead of 2 cars in 2 spots, they put 3 cars in 2 spots, and it is literally bumper to bumper to bumper. And so we come out of the game, the Cubs had lost. I was already not in a good mood, and we come up to our car, and there is literally, I'm not exaggerating, please believe me, I know I didn't read a lot of really great books, but I'm not lying to you right now. In front of the car was this much space. Behind the car was this much space. And I'm looking at this situation going, we're never getting out of here. Never. But the friend that I was with that had driven and the parking lot attendant that was there at the time said, we got this. No problem. You see, what my friend and this person had was faith. They had faith in their ability to direct and to drive this vehicle. And there was a small part of me that thought, hey man, it's your car. If you want to dent it up, that's okay. But they really believed that if we were careful and we were diligent and we were persistent and we persevered, we would get out of this parking spot. While they had faith, I had doubt. I was not so easily convinced that we were going to make it out of here. I had reservations, and I can tell you, if it had been my car and I had been driving, I would have said, let's go get a cup of coffee and come back at 2 in the morning when they're gone. I'm not going to do this. I just was not convinced that it could be done. It really wasn't a slight on my friend or this guy in the parking lot. It was just, this is impossible. What we're looking at is an impossibility. When I look back on that moment, I wonder what went through my buddy's head. I mean, what did he think of me? And what did he think that I thought of our friendship and his driving ability? And the poor guy in the parking lot. I mean, what does it say when you doubt a friend? What does it say when you doubt what would probably be considered a professional parker that works for Wrigleyville hot dogs? Right? Like, what does that say about you? What does it say about them? I can tell you what it didn't say about my friend. It didn't say that he took it so personally that he then was no longer in a relationship with me. Like, he did not make me walk home, which he could have done. He could have said, listen, if you're going to question my ability to handle this situation, then you can walk home to Gurney. I'm out of here. But he still let me in the car. He still drove me home. And what's amazing is he let me in the car before I stopped doubting the situation. I mean, even while we're going, the whole way I'm going, this is never going to happen. We might as well just lay the seats back and go to bed. Took me home, though. And see, that situation, to me, it was a huge learning experience. Because I think a lot of people, Christian or not, religious or not, churchgoer or not, find themselves In a moment like that, where they have some doubts about God, they're skeptical about the things that they hear at church, the things that get sung in some of these songs, or even some of the things that they read in the Bible. They're just not easily convinced that it's all going to go exactly how the preacher says it's going to go, or the author says it's going to go, or the blogger says it's going to go, or how the writer of the New Testament said it was going to go. And then, because we have that doubt, or because we're skeptical, we assume God does not want us. We assume that God looks at us and goes, there's no room in my car for a doubter, you can walk. We assume that until we erase all doubt, until we have every question answered, God only has time for the faithful. And not just the faithful, big faith, right? The people that when you express your doubt to them, they go, you just got to believe. If you just believe, then all your doubt would go away. And you're like, I've been trying to believe, but the doubt is what's keeping me from believing. And I don't think you're listening to me, so I just won't participate. But I have good news for you. And if you don't hear me say anything else the rest of the way, I'm okay with that as long as you hear this next statement. Jesus is for the skeptic too. Jesus is for the skeptic too. He didn't just come for the people who have it all figured out. He didn't just come for the people who believe blindly. He didn't just come for the people who can mathematically sketch out all the reasons that they believe God is exactly who he says he is. Jesus came for the skeptic too. And here's how I know beyond the shadow of a doubt that he did. Because I know his brother. And my question to you that I'll come back to over and over again, what would it take for your sibling to convince you that they were your Lord? Think about that for a minute. What would it take for your brother or your sister to get you to say, you are the Son of the living God? You are the Savior of the world, and bend your knee in service to them? What would it take? You know why you're hesitating? Because you're skeptical of that idea. And James, Jesus' brother, was skeptical of that idea too. In fact, all of Jesus' family, I think, was skeptical of the things that he said. His entire neighborhood, all of his neighbors, all of his family friends were skeptical of the things that he was saying. And you find that right in the middle of Mark's account, or his recording of Jesus' life. Mark chapter 6, this is what it says. And some of this is going to be a whole new idea to you because you thought Jesus just kind of existed in a singular bubble. But he was a part of a family, a pretty big family actually. This is someone responding to who Jesus is. He's just a carpenter, the son of Mary and the brother of James. Joseph, his other brother, Judas, his other brother, and Simon, and his sisters live right here among us. I know. You're reading that like I read it, and you're going, what? Jesus was part of a big family. Now, they weren't all the sons and daughters of God. The rest of them were the sons and daughters of Joseph and Mary. But can you imagine growing up in the house where Jesus was your big brother? What would that be like? And Jesus was the oldest, so if you're not the oldest, you know what it's like to have an oldest. If you are the oldest, you assume that you are nothing but peaches and cream for your siblings. Please ask them. I mean, if Jesus was your older brother, how many times did Mary or Joseph go, why can't you be more like Jesus? Think about that. Why wouldn't that happen? How often did they hear, well, Jesus has never lied to us. Jesus has never come home late. What's wrong with you? I mean, can you imagine? And then, so all the neighbors, they see that Jesus is part of a pretty average family, and his siblings are all average, and his parents are all average, and his Joseph is just a carpenter guy, and why should we believe anything that he says? I mean, again, if you're a sibling, you're going, he's just my brother. He's just my sister. The reality for all of us, all of us, not just the people in the account that we're reading, is that we're most convinced by what's most common to us. The things that we see happen most regularly are the things that we're most convinced are true. Out of the ordinary things are called out of the ordinary because we really like to stick to the ordinary. And if it's outside of that, then we kind of have an excuse to dismiss it. And so my guess is James, who wrote James, that we're going to look at in a minute, he probably looked at Jesus and went, it's impossible for him to be the Messiah. Quit calling him that. And all of his neighbors in Nazareth probably said, he can't be the Messiah. He can't be the Savior. He can't be the Son of God. He's just Jesus. Because that's what they knew. It was just most common to them. And so I like to believe that the reason for my doubt in Wrigleyville was because I'd seen some pretty common things that looked an awful lot like this. And if you try to get out of a tight spot, parallel parking, you are going to end up not bumper to bumper, but bumper on bumper. And I didn't feel like dealing with an angry, probably slightly intoxicated Cubs goer mad that we bumped into their car. That was just what was most common to me. You see it all the time. So why would this time go any different? And this is how most of us do our lives. Someone drags us into church. It starts to feel very uncommon and very out of the ordinary, so we go back to what is most normal to us. Because all of our brains, the way God wired our brains, is to deal in what's called processing fluency. This is a technical term for whatever's easiest for you to think through is what you believe is most true. That's processing fluency. So if it's difficult for you to get your head around, we just dismiss it because it's not easy. And they've done studies to show people assume when they get a recipe in the old days, we used to put recipes on cards, like index cards. I know they're all on Pinterest now, but back in the day, you'd get it on a card, and if someone had written it in a hard-to-read handwriting, or it was printed in a difficult font, people assumed it was a more difficult recipe to get done. Because their brain was just having a hard time processing what was in front of them. Studies have shown that when people get tangible money in their hands from other countries that's not familiar to them, they assume it's less valuable than what they know. Because it's hard to process through the exchange rate and what does this number mean on this and who is this person on this and all of those kinds of things. They've shown that companies with an easier to pronounce name have a better IPO in the stock market than ones with more complicated names. Not because they're necessarily a better company, but because people's brains can process through that name a little bit easier. They like what's common and what's normal. And for most people, especially for Jesus' family, he was just normal. And so we go about the rest of his life, and there's always this kind of undercurrent. We tend to focus on the people that showed up in droves and followed Jesus everywhere, but there's always these few, and not even the Pharisees, but these few that are skeptical, that have their doubts about who Jesus is. But none more than his family. This is what we read in John's account. Remember, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, they all sit down to write down what happened with Jesus, and some of them give us some insights into these early years. It says it was time for the Jewish festival of shelters, so everybody's got to get in to Jerusalem to do this, and Jesus' brothers said to him, "Leave here and go to Judea." So leave here, meaning leave Nazareth and go to Judea where your followers can see your miracles. You can sense the sarcasm in what they're saying, right? You can't become famous if you hide like this. If you can do such wonderful things, show yourself to the world. For even his brothers didn't believe in him. You know what it's like when you set out to complete a task and your sibling or maybe even your mom and dad say, "This is going to be a challenge for you." Or when you come home and you say, "Hey, I made a basket today in gym class," and what does your brother or sister do right away? Prove it. I bet you can't do it again, right? Like this is how families work, and we see here that Jesus' own brothers don't believe him. They don't believe what he's saying. They don't believe what he's doing. They don't believe that he is the one. And so they kind of tease him. They push back on him and they say, okay, listen, hotshot, go into Jerusalem then. And start doing all the stuff that you say you're going to do or you're already doing, and say the things that you're going to say, and we'll see. We'll see just how legitimate you are. Because you're going to have to show it. You're going to have to prove it to everybody, not just these few good friends of yours that think you're cool. You got to show it to the world, because they adhered to the same things we do, and they would say seeing is believing. It's not enough for you to just tell me, Jesus. You're going to have to show me. And there's rumors going around about you, and you're going to have to show up in the public circle. Because here's the truth that none of us say outright, but all of us believe inwardly. Seeing is believing as long as everyone else sees it too. Right? You can be convinced that you saw something wrong if everybody else is coming around you going, you didn't see that. That can't be true. You're misremembering. You're exaggerating. And then you start to go, well, maybe I am. And so Jesus' brothers, they kind of push at him and they go, listen, you got to not only do this in front of other people, you got to do it in front of a lot of other people for us to even start entertaining the idea that you are who you say you are. Because again, as far as we know, you're just our brother that keeps bossing us around. And so for me in Wrigleyville, what I should have done, what I knew better to do, because here's what happened. I know you've been sitting on the edge of your seat wondering, did we actually get out? Got out free and clear. Not one bumper got touched. It was like one of the most amazing experiences, like my children being born and then this. Like miracle level. And what I should have done, because some of you are going, no way. If it was like this, there's no way you got out. You're skeptical, just like I was skeptical. And what I should have done was pulled out my phone. Because if you see it on a phone, you believe it, right? So I should have pulled out my phone. I should have recorded. I should have published it so that everyone could see it. So that you could believe the starting place and you could believe the ending place. Seeing is believing as long as everyone else sees it too. Because I could tell you I saw it with my own eyes all day long. And you could still go home convinced it's not the truth. And so in the first century, this is kind of the roadblock Jesus is facing. His own siblings are saying, we got to see it. And so does everybody else. They're skeptical. James is skeptical. Now here's what's interesting. Jesus knew that seeing is believing. And he knew that seeing is believing as long as everyone else sees it too. And so the ultimate act of love, the ultimate act of sacrifice, the like greatest miracle that he ever did, he did in front of everybody. Jesus is nailed to a cross and crucified, dies a brutal death, gets put in a tomb, and 3 days later comes back. But he didn't just come back to a few. He didn't just come back to the believers, which, by the way, there were none of at the time. You understand this, right? When Jesus was in the tomb, there were no Christians. Anyone that had started to be a Christian had stopped becoming a Christian. And here's how we know that. No one was standing at the tomb counting down. You ever thought about that? Why were they not out there going, okay, 3 days later, we got about 10 seconds, 5, 4. Nobody's doing that. You know where they are? They're huddled up, scared to death. And so I think Jesus goes, nobody's going to believe this until I show up to even the skeptics. And so he does. This is what Paul says happened on Jesus' resurrection. Christ died for our sins, just as the scriptures said. He was buried, and he was raised from the dead on the third day, just as the scriptures said. He was seen by Peter and then by the 12. After that, he was seen by more than 500 of his followers. Now pause right there, because a lot of us have rejected the idea of a resurrection because we think, well, if 12 guys are saying this, they could have pulled that trick off easy. But we're not talking about 12 guys. We're talking about more than 500 at least, who not only testified that Jesus rose from the dead, but they saw him. Jesus appeared to 500 of his followers at one time. So it's not like they all got together and told a story about different experiences. It's at one time, most of whom are still alive. So what Paul's saying is, I'm not telling you something that you can't go ask 500 other people about, and they won't tell you the same story, because they were there. They're still alive today, though some have died. And then get this is the thing. Then he was seen by James. And this James is not the James that was a disciple. That James had already been killed for what he believed. And we know this because of the time that Paul would have written 1 Corinthians up against the time that we know James, the brother of John, was martyred for his belief in Jesus. So this James is the brother of Jesus, James. And I find it fascinating that Jesus decides, I'm going to show up to my brother to prove to him once and for all that I am exactly who I said I am. And what's even more amazing to me is he doesn't put any stipulation on it. Because remember, no one believed at this point. James had not come out with a public declaration saying, you know what, even though he died, I believe that Jesus was the Son of God and that he was the Messiah who took away the sins of the world. Like, James had not said that. James had not stopped doubting. He'd not stopped being a skeptic. And yet Jesus shows up to him. James encountered Jesus in the midst of his doubt. James, Peter, John, all of them encountered Jesus in the midst of their doubt. But none of them had more doubt, more questions, more skepticism than James. Jesus shows up while he's still questioning everything and proves that he was and is the Son of God. And that, to me, is so reassuring. Because here's reality. I'm 38, almost 39. I have been going to church every week for all of my life. I've sat under some of the most incredible teachers, both in seminary and in the churches. I've read some of the most incredible theology books. I've read the Bible cover to cover. And I still have days, I still have moments where I'm skeptical. And in those moments, I start to assume God doesn't want to have anything to do with me then. But if that was true, then he wouldn't have wanted to have anything to do with James, who doubted him probably more than anyone else. And so what was so cool in Wrigleyville that day, like I said, they didn't make me walk home. My friend says, get in the car. He still allowed me to get in the car and sit and experience it for myself. I will prove it to you. I will show up in this moment and do what I said I'm going to do, and then maybe you'll believe. He didn't sit down in the car, lock the door, and say, tell me you won't doubt me anymore, then you can get in. He didn't sit there and go, I want you to say it to me, that you believe I can get out of the car. No, he said, get in, I'll show you. And I'll never question his ability to parallel park again, because I experienced it for myself. And Jesus is the same. Jesus is for the skeptic too. And so if you're here this morning or you're watching online and you are saying to yourself, I'm the skeptic, I'm the James in this story, the good news is Jesus is for you too. And he is a big, big God. And he can handle your questions. And he can handle your doubts. And he can handle your skepticism. All he says to you is, come and see. Come and see. Come and experience. Just stick your toe in the water. And this is what happens for James, his brother. Listen to the change in tone from what we've already looked at. These are the very words of James in his letter to Jewish Christians. This is what he writes. This letter is from James, a slave of God and of the Lord Jesus Christ. What would it take for you to believe that your sibling was your Lord? For James, it was an appearance of his risen Savior, Lord, brother. Jesus showing up in the midst of his doubt, in the midst of his questions. And for me, James stands as one of the greatest proofs of the truth. One of the greatest proofs of the truth is that James wrote the letter he wrote. Because here's the deal. The result of something proves something. The result of something proves something. If you can look at a result, you go, well, something happened. Something took place. This didn't just come out of nowhere. For me, in Wrigleyville, it was an empty space, because here's what happened. We back out, we pull out, we get out, and we're gone, and then there is an empty hole there. And everybody that walked by went, wow, there must have been a car there, because there's an empty space there now. This guy, who's a professional parker, would never have left that space like that. This is the result of something happening, and you look back and you go, if that's the result, then something really took place. And besides that, we have a witness in the parking lot guy. I wish I knew his name, because it'd probably be better to refer to him by his name than the parking lot guy, but he's there. And if you really don't believe me, it's Wrigleyville Dogs, right down by the stadium. You go there, he'll be there. So we have James, his testimony of who Jesus is. And the result of his testimony is that he wrote one of the most intense, in-your-face letters about what it means to follow Jesus that's ever been written. And spoiler alert, we're going to look at the whole thing starting next week. So, here, I'm excited about it too. But you look at the result, you look at the testimony, and you look at where the testimony comes from. You can lean into something that you may not know you lean into all the time. It's this idea. People trust the storyteller before they trust the story. People have to trust the storyteller before they trust the story. If they don't believe you and what you're saying or the character of who you are, they're not going to believe what you're saying. And this is important. This is so important. Because in a lot of ways, we struggle with reading something like the Bible and accepting it. But we're not just talking about some book that magically appeared out of nowhere. We're talking about the testimony of Matthew. We're talking about the testimony of Mark, which is really Peter's testimony that Mark recorded for us. We're talking about the testimony of Luke and John and James and Paul, people who were there and died for what they say. You don't die for something you're making up. You just don't. Go back to your siblings. Would you die for a story you were making up to cover their butt? No. You might have initially said, okay, I'll help you with mom and dad. I'll go along with the story. And then mom and dad pull this card. If someone doesn't fess up, then you're all being punished. It was him. Right? Like, we didn't even want to get grounded for something that was being made up. let alone die. Here's James. If anybody that could doubt, it was James. And he believed. So Christians that are in the room, if you're not a Christian, you can let this go. But if you're a Christian, you have to understand something about the people who are not connected to God yet in your life. They have to trust you first. And the question that we have to wrestle with is, are we living the kind of life, are we being the kind of people where someone would trust what we're saying because we're actually living it? We might be the greatest barrier to someone's faith because we're not who we say we are. And it starts to feel like we're kind of just making it up, and they start to be skeptical. So, a couple things that I think would help you navigate this, both with someone that isn't you but is skeptical, but also if you're you and you're skeptical. A couple things that just kind of, I think, need to be in place that will help in both things. I just call these practices. Practices for when you're struggling with skepticism, outward or inward. Number one is this: tell yourself the honest truth. Please, like I'm begging you to be honest with yourself. Brutally so. Say it out loud. You might have to literally lock the door because maybe you don't want anybody else to hear this, but you say it out loud. I am skeptical about fill in the blank. Or I am doubting God, fill in the blank. Don't worry, God is not going to strike you with lightning. Just be honest about it, please, with yourself, if not anybody else. The second step is a little more difficult, I think, and that's this: give God the benefit of the doubt. For a moment, suspend your disbelief, suspend your skepticism, admit to it, and then go, okay, but I'm going to give God the benefit of the doubt. I'm going to trust that He's honest, and I'm going to lean into this a little bit and explore it some more. Give God the benefit of the doubt. Trust Him. Give Him trust. Don't wait for Him to earn it. Give it to Him, and I promise you, He'll earn it. The third practice I think that is so important is to be transparent with others. Be willing to say to someone else, whether they're a Christian or even if they're not a Christian, I'm not sure about that either. Do you want to see a light bulb go off in your non-Christian friend's life? Let them hear a Christian say, I don't know that I've got the answer to that. Because most people assume we'll fake it till we make it. But can you imagine what it's like for you to be honest, even if it's not with a non-Christian, but just another Christian, whether that's in your community group or someone that you are just good friends with, to say, I'm really struggling with doubt right now. I'm skeptical about my faith. There, I said it. And you watch how they respond. I bet you they would go, yeah, I get that. Then the last practice is even more difficult. Expect God to honor your seeking. Expect Him to. And here's how you can expect something of God. When God Himself says, ask, seek, knock, and the door will be open to you, you will find, you can bank on it. When Jesus Himself makes that kind of promise, you can live in expectation that when you're seeking and you are navigating your way through your skepticism, that God will show up. Not when you stop doubting, but in the midst of your doubting, because faith isn't the opposite of doubt. This is what we usually believe, that faith is the opposite of doubt. Faith is the pursuit of God in the midst of our doubt. And sometimes when you're reading through the Bible, those will be kind of set up as opposites, but that's not really the intention there. The intention is own your doubt, own your humanity, and then hold on to God with white knuckles and pursue Him so He can put your mind at ease, so He can show up in ways that you did not expect Him to show up. So the question for us, the big question is not this. Do you believe 100% of the 100%? All of the time? That's not the question. Because nobody does. If they tell you they do, you can be skeptical. The question that I believe Jesus asks you, the same question he asked James, the same question he asked Peter, the same question he asked Paul, was, will you get in the car? Will you get in the car, let me drive? Let me show you. Let me prove that I really am who I say I am. Will you come with your doubt? Will you come with your questions? Will you come with your skepticism? Give me the benefit of the doubt for just a little while. And let me show you I can help you navigate through all of it. You see, the truth is, Jesus is for the skeptic too. And what's amazing is that for each person that Jesus shows up to, all 500 something odd people, and countless people since then, is that they had a moment where they went, Jesus, you're bigger than I thought you were. There was a moment where James had all of his childhood run through his mind. All of the moments with Jesus as kids and teenagers and adults. And he had to go, Jesus, you are bigger than I thought you were. And so together, as we conclude our time, we're going to sing a song that has those very words in it. And you might be here this morning with a lot of questions, and my hope is that you'll sing it with us. Jesus, you're bigger than I thought you were. At least in that you are for the skeptic too. And that you show up for the skeptic too. So I'm going to pray, and then our team will come out and they'll lead us in this amazing, amazing song that you can use as a prayer this morning. Jesus, here is the honest truth. We are all skeptics. We all have days where we wish you would show up physically. We wish you would write something on the wall so that we knew. We wish you would do some crazy miracle that has no explanation other than miracle so that we could believe, so that our doubts could be erased, so that our questions could be forever answered. But I believe more often than not, you say, just get in the car. Let's start there. Take one small step. Get in the car. Let me drive. And I'll take you to places you didn't even know were possible. Lord, our prayer is that we would live our lives with our eyes wide open and our mouths wide open in awe of who you are, in awe of what you've done. And that the song that would resonate over and over and over and over and over and over again in our hearts is that you are bigger than we thought you were. We love you. Amen.